It's the year 336 BCE, and on the verge of his greatest conquest, Philip II, the king of Macedonia, is unexpectedly assassinated by one of his most trusted bodyguards. His 20-year-old son inherits not only his conquered lands, but also the most powerful military in the world. Though many at the time doubted the young king, he soon proved to not only be a worthy successor to his father's throne, but also one of, if not the greatest general in the history of mankind. He passes away at the young age of 32, but generations of historians and orators tell tales of his conquests. His bravery and victories against all odds are legendary, and they gave him the name Alexander the Great. But here's the thing about great men in history. Oftentimes, two things can be true at once. Alexander the Great was no doubt one of the most brilliant military minds of all time, but he was also a raging alcoholic, and like other goats, he had a huge chip on his shoulder, and this made him take things very, very personally. Like this time, for example. Number 1. The destruction of Thebes. Shortly after Alexander inherited King Philip's throne, many of the lands his father had conquered began to rebel. Alexander wasted no time traveling to crush these rebellions, but back in Greece, conquered city-states began to wonder if they too could regain their independence from the Macedonians. Cities like Athens dipped their toes into the inviting pool of independence, but no one in Greece shot their shot harder than the people of Thebes. See, the Thebans saw Philip's death as their chance to finally regain their freedom. Philip was a scary dude, but his son? He was only 20, young and untested. If there was ever a time to fight back, it's now. They begin sending out passionate calls for help to other Greek cities, trying to rally a united Greek army to drive out the Macedonians. The Thebans then started killing or arresting any Macedonian supporters they could find in their city and began stockpiling weapons. While away handling his business up north, Alexander hears what the Thebans are up to and makes a beeline back to Greece, covering an incredible distance in just 13 days. And so, on a morning in early September of 335 BCE, the Thebans are shocked to find Alexander and his army positioned right outside of their city walls. Initially, Alexander tried to be reasonable. Okay guys, I know all of you can't be guilty, so just hand over the troublemakers and we're good. Okay, sure, we'll give them all up as soon as you hand yourself over to us, you fucking barbarian.
Sick bird, bro.
Look at me, I'm Philip. Kill them all. Now, back in this day, aside from a few notable exceptions, Greek city-states were generally left unharmed during wars. Thebes in particular had existed for over 1,500 years, but Alexander orders his men to siege the city. The Thebans remained inside the city walls, confident that they had a good shot at pulling off this upset. See, when Alexander was away, they secretly made a pact with Athens to work together to fight against the Macedonians. But when Alexander showed up in Greece, the Athenians got cold feet and ghosted, leaving the Thebans to fight all alone. Realizing the Athenians were not coming to their rescue, the Thebans decide to march out of the city and fight Alexander head-on before they're weakened by starvation. Fighting not only for their freedom, but for the lives of their wives and children inside the city, the Thebans go toe-to-toe against the mighty Macedonian army. No one is able to gain an edge, and the stalemate drags on, until Alexander learns of an undefended gate. He sends a unit into the city, and when the Thebans learn that their loved ones are being terrorized, they break formation and are forced to retreat to fight within the city. The famous Theban cavalry made their last stand in the agora, but by sunset, the plaza's fountains ran red with blood. The survivors, men, women, and children, were herded like cattle into holding pens. And here, Alexander, calmed down a bit but not really, tries to be diplomatic. He assembles representatives from the smaller Greek cities surrounding Thebes to vote on the fate of the city and its people. But here's the thing, the Thebans had bullied these smaller cities around them for centuries, so unsurprisingly they all vote for Alexander to tear it all down. The Macedonian army sweeps through the streets of Thebes. Block by block, house by house, they tore the city apart. Soldiers systematically moved through the neighborhoods with torches, creating fires so intense that the marble buildings cracked and exploded, and the great walls, which had stood for centuries, were pulled down stone by stone until they were nothing but rubble. Merchants from as far as Carthage and Egypt arrived within days, and every one of the 30,000 surviving citizens of Thebes were sold off into slavery. Other Greek cities like Athens looked at the smoking ruins of Thebes and are horrified at the total destruction of the once great city. They all find their loyalty real quick, and Alexander's now free to carry out his father's mission of conquering Persia. Number 2. Cleitus the Black. It's 334 BCE, and Alexander's leading his first major invasion into Achaemenid Persian territory, and at the Battle of Granicus, the fighting is intense.
Cleitus, let us show them how it's done! Yes, my king. This epic fight is brought to you by Raycon.
For the record, don't try to make y'all comfortable. For the record, don't try to grow that stone for you. For the record, lab on me going all the way. For the record, ain't trying to link no time to waste. For the record, yeah. For the record.
As you can see, these earbuds are awesome. I personally use them when I'm
Slaying your greatest foes?
no, like working out or running errands around town.
Oh, I guess it would work for that too, but they're also good for drowning out the screams of your mortal enemies!
Right. Well, you can get your own set. Go to buyraycon.com/serioushistory to get 20% off the everyday earbuds they're wearing.
What? I thought I heard you say 20% off!
That's right. Raycon's offering 20% off their everyday earbuds when you go to buyraycon.com/serioushistory.
That's really cool! Thank you again, Raycon, for sponsoring this fight! I mean, video!
Anyways, Alexander, as always, is leading from the front lines. With his white plumed helmet, he's easy to spot, which you would think would make him an easy target, but he's a fierce and skilled warrior and strikes down soldier after soldier who dares to engage him. But after thrusting his blade into the next unlucky Persian NPC, his sword gets stuck, lodged in the dead man's armor. While struggling to remove his sword, a Persian commander sees his opening and charges at Alexander from behind, swinging his axe with evil intent. Just as the axe was about to cleave Alexander's head into two, one of his father's trusted generals, a man named Cleitus the Black, thrusts his spear through the Persian's chest, saving the young king's life just in the nick of time. The would-be killer topples sideways into the bloody river, his axe falling harmlessly beside him. After saving his life, Cleitus becomes one of Alexander's most trusted commanders and was known for two things: his unwavering loyalty and his brutal honesty. While Alexander's court was filled with yes-men who would kiss his ass all day long, Cleitus was different. He'd tell Alexander exactly what he thought, and Alexander actually respected this about him, at least until he didn't. See, in 328 BCE, Alexander's in Marakanda, modern-day Samarkand in Uzbekistan. He's already conquered half the known world, and as a thank you to Cleitus, he rewards him by making him the satrap of an area called Bactria. Now, being a satrap wasn't some minor position. It meant you were basically a governor of an entire region. But Cleitus wasn't happy about this quote-unquote promotion. He saw this as exactly the opposite, as he would be far away from the king and be forgotten. On top of this, the Macedonian veterans who had followed Alexander across the world watched as their king slowly transforms into something they didn't recognize. As he conquered Persian lands, Alexander began to adopt Persian customs, wear Persian clothes, and act more like a Persian king than a Macedonian one. To old-school Macedonians like Cleitus, this was repulsive, and the growing resentment of all this Persian bullshit and the humiliating new assignment explodes at a feast in 328 BCE. The feast at Marakanda started like any other. Wine flowed freely, and as usual, Alexander began bragging and praising his own achievements, comparing himself to heroes like Hercules, and talking about how he's already done more than his father Philip ever did. The room filled with the sounds of yes-men clapping and nodding along to every word, while Cleitus quietly attempts to drink his resentment away. And it's at this point Alexander announces he has new assignments for his most loyal of generals.
Cleitus, my friend, you are to take these defeated Greek mercenaries who we just beat and go to fight, I don't know, like those annoying nomads on the steppe or something, I guess.
This assignment was the ultimate insult to Cleitus. He had saved Alexander's life, served him and his father loyally, and now he was being banished to the steppe with a bunch of Greek losers? His pride could take no further injury, and he stands and shouts,
"Are these the words of the son of Zeus? Every victory was won by Macedonian blood. But look at you. You dress like a Persian."
Holy shit. The room goes dead silent. Even drunk, everyone knows this is bad, and Alexander's face boils red. Cleitus continues to pop off, bringing up Alexander's dad and how ashamed he would be, and then complaining about his assignment, each word more bitter than the last. Alexander's now so pissed, he grabs an apple from the table and throws it at Cleitus's head. He begins to storm towards Alexander, ready to fight. The other officers restrain him and drag him from the hall, kicking and screaming, his voice trailing off as he's carried away. Crisis averted, Alexander's given a brief moment to collect himself. Okay, now, before I was so rudely interrupted, you, my dear friend Perdiccas, you will— And one more thing, your dad was way cooler than you. Yeah, boy! That's it. Alexander grabs a spear from one of his guards, and before anyone could react, he drives it through Cleitus's heart, killing him instantly. The second Cleitus hits the ground, Alexander sobers up real quick. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stood there, watching his friend's blood pool on the floor. The man who had saved his life at Granicus, who had served him faithfully for years, was dead by his own hand. He tries to turn the spear on himself, but his guards stop him, and for 3 days he stays in his tent, refusing to eat or drink, crying and screaming that he's become a murderer like the barbarians he conquered. The ancient sources tell us Alexander deeply regretted killing Cleitus, but the damage to his reputation as a fair and balanced ruler was done, and regret couldn't bring back his dearest friend. Number 3. The Tyre Land Bridge. It's 332 BCE, and at this point, Alexander was basically unstoppable. In just 2 years, he'd steamrolled through Asia Minor, crushed the Persians at Granicus and Issus, and turned the entire Mediterranean coastline into Macedonian territory. Well, almost the entire coastline, I guess, except for a city called Tyre. See, Tyre was a heavily fortified island fortress half a mile offshore of modern-day Lebanon, and they politely told him to f*** off. Protected by 150-foot walls and the Mediterranean Sea itself, Tyre had never fallen to siege in its entire history. When Alexander rolled up on the city, he said he wished to leave an offering at the temple of Melkart that he'd heard was there. The Tyrians refused, and this turned out to be a huge mistake, because you see, Alexander was a huge Hercules fanboy, and Melkart, he had heard, was the Phoenician equivalent of Hercules. Being denied an opportunity to fanboy out was insulting. Alexander took this no very, very personally. So he decided Tyre needed to be taught a lesson, which led him to going full Minecraft. Alexander ordered his men to build a massive land bridge of stone and sand straight through the sea to reach the island. The Tyrians watched from their walls, at first laughing at a distance as they watched Alexander's army hopelessly dumping sand and stone into the ocean. But they soon started freaking out as Alexander's bridge got closer and closer. At a certain point, the people in Tyre realized that this lunatic might actually reach them, so they sent divers to mess with the bridge's foundations and launched counterattacks from their walls. They loaded up old horse transport ships with cedar wood, pitch, sulfur, and whatever else would burn, setting them on fire and sending them straight into Alexander's construction project. As hard as they tried, nothing seemed to work, and the bridge got closer and closer every day. But just as Alexander's bridge was nearly complete, nature itself seemed to join Tyre's side. A storm hit and destroyed a large part of the bridge. Then a whale, not making this up, got stuck in the construction debris and caused delays. But even nature could not defeat Alexander, and he rebuilt the bridge, made it wider, and added wooden towers with giant crossbows on top. Before long, his half-mile bridge to Tyre was complete. The bridge took 8 months to finish, and Alexander's patience had run out. When the rams finally cracked the city walls, his men poured through like a tide of vengeance. He ordered his navy to surround the island and sink any ship that tried to flee. The Macedonians enter the city and ruthlessly slaughter 8,000 Tyrians. The survivors soon wished they died in the initial slaughter, as Alexander ordered 2,000 men dragged to the beach and crucified along the shore. The entire surviving population of 30,000 people were then sold into slavery. The only ones spared were those who sought sanctuary in the Temple of Melkart, the same temple Alexander wanted to visit in the first place. Now, building a half-mile land bridge because you felt insulted is pretty insane, but to me, the craziest thing is that this land bridge Alexander built is still there today over 2,000 years later. He literally changed the geography of the Lebanese coast forever because someone told him no. Number 4. Batis. So after Tyre, Alexander steamrolls through the Persian Empire and is heading to Egypt when he hits a speed bump called Gaza. During this time, Gaza was an ancient fortress city perched on a massive hilltop that controlled the only road between Syria and Egypt. By this time, cities in the area had begun to surrender peacefully when they saw Alexander and his army approaching. But Gaza was different. It was commanded by a man named Batis, who had zero intention of letting Alexander just stroll through. See, the Persians stationed at Gaza weren't just ordinary soldiers. They were veterans who'd sworn blood oaths to protect this gateway to Egypt, and whose fathers and grandfathers had held this same wall.
"Let the boy king come," they said. "Our ancestors didn't bow to Xerxes himself. We sure as hell won't bow to some Macedonian pup."
And of course, Alexander did not like this one bit. And just like the troublemakers at Tyre, the people of Gaza and Batis in particular were about to find out what happens when Alexander the Great feels disrespected. Knowing that Minecraft is now an option, Alexander orders his men to create a giant dirt ramp to breach the walls of Gaza. His men begin hauling dirt and piling it near the city walls, the whole time dodging flaming arrows and boiling oil from the defenders. This went on for months, until a lucky Persian hit Alexander with a bolt that punched through his shield and buried itself in his shoulder, leaving him with one arm but twice the rage. When Alexander's ramp finally topped the walls of Gaza, Alexander led his men into the city. Unafraid, Batis' soldiers charge and meet the invaders head-on. The fighting is intense, hand-to-hand and on every street, but the soldiers of Gaza are ultimately no match for the Macedonian army. Though they know they have no hope of victory, not one soldier surrenders, and they die fighting or are captured. Following the battle, the citizens of the city are gathered and sold into slavery. Batis fights until the end, and he's amazingly captured alive. He's brought to Alexander, but instead of groveling, he stands in silence. By this time, Alexander had become fond of the Persian customs of people bowing to their emperor, and he took this lack of bowing from Batis personally. He's there sneering at Batis as he stands proudly in defiance, but then realizes that this governor of Gaza may help him live out one of his childhood fantasies. See, as we know from Tyre, Alexander liked Hercules, but Achilles was his all-time Greek goat. He slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow and frequently visited Troy to leave offerings at Achilles' tomb. His life goal was to prove to the world he was just as great as his hero. Having read the Iliad countless times, Alexander recalls the climactic battle between Achilles, the champion of Greece, and Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy. The story goes, fueled by rage for the killing of his best friend, Achilles defeats Hector and drags his dead body from a chariot as revenge. Alexander looks at Batis and smiles. He orders his men to get his chariot and then orders bronze rings driven through Batis' ankles, which are then fastened to said chariot. Once preparations are complete, Alexander gets in, looks back at Batis, and cracks the reins. The horses break out into a full-blown charge, and Alexander giddily does laps around the city walls, with Batis being dragged along behind him. The whole time, Alexander's trying his best to look cool, just like Achilles, but he can't really contain his excitement. Guys, look at me! I'm Achilles! Yeah, boy! Alexander had missed one minor detail in his reenactment, though. See, in the Iliad, Hector was already dead when Achilles started dragging him around. Batis, on the other hand, was still alive. Ironic, because the whole point of that story was about the futility of revenge and the importance of mercy. But oh well, Batis was dead by the end of Alexander's bumpy ride, so same ending, I guess.